So my name is Sherwood Wilkes. I'm a student at UNC Charlotte. I'm a chemistry major. I'm going to finish in December with a BS in chemistry, minor in religious studies, and maybe even a minor in mathematics. So we'll see how that goes. So I started beekeeping with my mother in 4th grade. She gave me a bee suit, which she now wears. I now wear hers because of our body size. And so I wear the big one, she wears the small one. But yeah, I help her move the heavy stuff, and she teaches me along the way. So I would not know anything without you, Mother, or thank you, or Bob Blackwater. Because I went to Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. A while ago when I was 11, and learned a lot from Bob. So we had one hive, and it split a bunch, or swarmed, and then wax moths and other pests got into it and killed it. We have a hive now that's doing pretty good. So that's good. All right, so what is this presentation all about? This is determining if there's any pesticides at all in a sample of honey. Now the sample of honey, if I can get it, is this honey bear. This is the culprit. This is a Chestnut Hill premium clover honey. It says it was distributed in Matthews, but honestly I don't have an exact location as to where this honey was taken from, which hive. But it's going to give us a good idea, I think, of what maybe we're to expect. This is only one batch of honey. This is only taken during one part of the year. This is only one sample. This is only one test. Okay, so keep that in mind in terms of its reproducibility, in terms of its accuracy as an actual data point, because those things will change as you do more tests. Okay, cool. Now, I tested three pesticides: lindane, diazonon, and Cabarrus. So lindane is lice shampoo. That's a silly choice. We'll get into that later. Diazonon is ant killer. It can also be used to kill other types of insects, but that's pretty common. You can pick that up at Home Depot or Lowe's. And the last one is Cabarrus, which is 7 dust, and we all know that one. So that you can also find in your hardware stores, your Lowe's, and your Home Depot. So that's why I chose these on two criteria. One, they're very common. Number 2, they're GC amendable, which we'll get into later. But essentially, the point of this experiment was to use an instrument that we were taught about in class, and to have a real-world sample, and to be able to use the instrument in the way it would be used normally in an actual laboratory, to be trained on the instrument, to get to know a little bit more about it. So that's the point of the whole special project that I did. So again, I'm testing these 3 pesticides, and we're going to see if they're in this sample coming from this honey bear. All right, so to start off, y'all don't need to know all the details, but the instrument itself is called a gas chromatography mass spectrometer, otherwise known as GC mass spec, and this is what the USDA is going to use to test your samples. If you send a sample to a laboratory, they're going to be using a GC mass spec to analyze it rather accurately. These things can get down to the nanograms per gram, parts per billion. That's very small. That's 10 to the -9th. Anyway, so without bearing all the specifics, this was the instrument I was supposed to use accurately and efficiently. But keep in mind, this is also my first time using this method, so. Okay. So the procedure, the lab procedure that I used is called the Quetcher's method. That stands for quick, easy, cheap, effective, rugged, and safe. You may have heard of this. This again was created by the USDA. This is the procedure they use in the laboratory. This is the procedure that I used to make honey. Now there's an avocado up there. That's not what I used. Obviously we used honey, but it works for anything above 85% water. Now you may be thinking, oh, but Sherwood, honey is less than 85% water, and that's okay because I hydrated it with water, added some water, and it worked just fine. That's good. Now we're going to get into, we're not going to get too technical, but I'm going to explain to you the basic understanding of how we got this data, or how I got this data. We're making a calibration curve, okay, and so what we do is we just take some standards, high purity, that we get from Sigma Aldrich, which is a company that provides high purity, 99.99% of that pesticide. We make a few dilutions at different concentrations, and then we test those on the GC mass spec, and we get a calibration curve out of it, a straight line. It's the chemist's dream, is a straight line. Curved lines are not good. And then we're going to test our sample and see where it aligns on this straight line. And wherever it lands on this straight line is going to give us an estimate or an approximation as to what the actual concentration is. Okay, now here's the funny part. There's no lice shampoo in honey, and that's probably a rational thing, right? I mean, the honey, the bees aren't washing themselves for lice, and we're not treating them with lice shampoo, so there's none. As you can see, there's a 0 there, plus or minus 570 nanograms per gram, and that essentially means there's none. We can trust that number, I would say. That's a pretty rational thing, there's no lice shampoo. Diazinon is that ant killer I was talking about, and that only showed up to be 340, but if you notice, the uncertainty is 710, so 340 plus or minus 710, that's not an accurate number. Okay, so I'm going to need more tests in order to hone down on that number. So we're not going to trust that one either. But what we can trust is the Cabarrus, which is our 7 dust, right? That was at very high concentration. How high matters, we'll get into later. That's a good question. But this was 17 parts per million, which is 3 magnitudes higher than parts per billion. 17,000 parts per billion, so we definitely have some in our sample, which would make sense because everyone uses 7 dust to get rid of the June bugs and whatever else. So it makes sense that our forages are going out, they're picking up this stuff, and they're returning it back to the hive. But past this, so greater questions, that's pretty much the end of the data. And you don't have to read that. That's okay. So what can we assume, what was the point of the experiment? The point of the experiment was to use the instrument correctly and get data. We got that. We did that. We found Cabarrus is actually in our sample at reasonable, we have reasonable certainty that it is in our sample. Now it is unfortunate that we found a lot of pesticide in our honey, though it becomes, the next question is, well, how much is too much? Well, I don't know that answer. That would be useful for more testing, or a biochemist may know that. I'm just a chemist. Or a biologist may know how much parts per billion would hurt a bee, but I don't know that. I would assume, though, that it's probably pretty low because the bee's still alive because there's actually honey. So it's probably below what would be necessary to kill a bee because there's actually honey existing. So if there's too much, there won't be any honey. Otherwise, to strengthen the data, I would do more tests. I might do multiple different samples. That would be interesting. And one of the cool ideas would be to, so like we said earlier, bees forage in a 3-mile radius around the hive, right? And so you could get a demographic, you could get an understanding of what kind of pesticides your neighbor is using. Let's say that you're an organic beekeeper. You don't use any chemicals. You really don't like those chemicals. Don't like using any man-made chemicals on your bees, however, or on your garden. However, your neighbor does, and that's going to show up in the data because those bees are just going to your neighbor's flowers just like they go to your flowers. Okay, and so this could be a problem because if you're claiming to have organic, chemical-free honey simply because you didn't use any pesticides on your flowers, that's not necessarily true. Your neighbor could have been, and that can still get into your honey. So maybe we shouldn't trust organic labels, only if it's been tested by the USDA and those concentrations are below detection limits or something of that sort. Okay, that's pretty much a summation of the project. Does anyone have any questions? If you want technicality and science language, I would love to give it. I can do that too. But I'd like to appreciate some people that helped me along with this. So first and foremost, Mom and Dad helped me with my sanity through the semester, and they also gave me advice and guidance when I didn't know exactly some of the biology, and they helped me with that. Kimberly Falk helped me in the laboratory. She was somewhat of a lab mate, and she kept me company in the long nights. Dr. Brian Cooper was my professor, and he had the patience to invest in me and in the project, so I have to thank him. He also gave me his own procedure that he wrote for this, the Quetcher's method, which is just like making my job easy. All right, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Would it be difficult to test for some of the chemicals that we use to treat bees? You'd have to find to get your baseline, you'd have to have pure chemicals. Do you think they'd be available?
So are you asking, how do you get a pure chemical?
Yeah.
That is a complicated process, especially if it's an organic chemical, because organics there's everything in organic compounds and samples. But for me, we just buy it from Signaladrich. I don't know how they do it, but we just buy the 99.99% purity stuff, and it works. So
They have pretty much every chemical that's used.
yeah, they do. Yes, sir.
What might be interesting is you take a sample from a local beekeeper versus a sample that may have come from who knows where.
Right.
And packaged in Matthews, North Carolina.
Yeah.
And compare them, because we know we're dealing with the Chinese markets
Okay.
and infiltrating our markets. So
Right.
if you were to do it again, if you grab some local beekeepers here and make a comparison between unprocessed or raw, and you get processed dill and
Yeah.
heated.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. It's a beautiful question, and that's actually kind of like the bigger questions that would come through. Is what is the honey that comes out of our local hives? What does that look like? What are there pesticides that I should be worrying about in my hive? And what are the ones that we're getting from other countries? As you know, other countries can use more lethal stuff, worse stuff, pesticides that are bad. So like EPA might protect us a little bit in some things. But in another country, you can use whatever. And so if we import that honey, we could have some really bad stuff on our hands. But again, I wouldn't stress too much until there's good science and that there's good rationality, that there's high enough concentration to where it does hurt. You have many things in your body right now that are so low concentrations that it's not hurting you. Okay, so just simply because it's 17 parts per billion doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to kill a bee or hurt you. That would have to take rational and evidence. Yes, sir. Yeah. We don't know. It says on the bottle it was distributed in Matthews, but that's all I got. I bought it on the Family Dollar on 49, right beside Central Cabarrus High School. Yeah. That's funny, actually.
I'm not sure if it's still there. I mean, if anybody's interested, there used to be a lab in Gastonia, USDA lab. I don't know the guy's name.
Yeah, I'm sure you could find a lab that would do it. Just about any lab, a good lab in North Carolina is going to have a GC mass spec. And if anyone wants to see the data or all the juicy stuff, it's in this giant packet. That's the grueling work they put us through, but it's a degree. So, anyone else? All right, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.